Involuntary commitment. A civil commitment is a legal process through which an individual who is deemed by a qualified agent to have symptoms of severe psychiatric disease is court-ordered into treatment in a mental institution or in the community. Criteria for civil commitment are established by laws, which vary between nations. Commitment proceedings often follow a period of emergency hospitalization, during which an individual with acute psychiatric symptoms is confined for a relatively short duration in a treatment facility for evaluation and stabilization by mental health professionals, who may then determine whether further civil commitment is appropriate or necessary. If civil commitment proceedings follow, then the evaluation is presented in a formal court hearing where testimony and other evidence may also be submitted. The subject of the hearing is typically entitled to legal counsel and may challenge a commitment order through habeas corpus rules. Historically, until the first third of the 20th century or later in most jurisdictions, all committals to public psychiatric facilities and most committals to private ones were involuntary. Since then, there have been alternating trends towards the abolition of substantial reduction of involuntary commitment, a trend known as deinstitutionalization. Purpose. In most jurisdictions, involuntary commitment is specifically applied to individuals believed to be experiencing a mental illness that impairs the reasoning ability to such an extent that the agents of the law, state, or courts determine that decisions will be made for the individual under a legal framework. Involuntary commitment is used to some degree for each of the following headings, although different jurisdictions have different criteria. Some jurisdictions limit court-ordered treatment to individuals who meet statutory criteria for presenting a danger to self or others. Quote, other jurisdictions have broader criteria. First aid training is gradually becoming available in mental health first aid to equip community members such as teachers, school administrators, police officers, and medical workers with training in recognizing and authority in managing situations where involuntary evaluations of behavior are applicable under law. The extension of first aid training to cover mental health problems and crises is a quite recent development. A mental health first aid training course was developed in Australia in 2001 and has been found to improve assistance provided to persons with an alleged mental illness or mental health crisis. This form of training has now spread to a number of other countries. Mental health triage may be used in an emergency room to make a determination about potential risk and apply treatment protocols. Observation is sometimes used to determine whether a person warrants involuntary commitment. It is not always clear on a relatively brief examination whether a person is psychotic or otherwise warrants commitment. Containment of danger. Austria, Belgium, Germany, Israel, the Netherlands, Northern Ireland, Russia, Taiwan, Ontario, and the United States have adopted commitment criteria based on the presumed danger of the defendant to self or to others. People with suicidal thoughts may act on these impulses and harm or kill themselves. People with psychosis are occasionally driven by the delusions or hallucinations to harm themselves or others. People with certain types of personality disorders can occasionally present a danger to themselves or others. This concern has found expression in the standards for involuntary commitment in every U.S. state and in other countries as the danger to self or others standard, sometimes supplemented by the requirement that the danger be imminent. Quote, in some jurisdictions, the danger to self or others standard has been broadened refined in recent years to include need for treatment criteria such as gravely disabled, deinstitutionalization. Starting in the 1960s, there has been a worldwide trend toward moving psychiatric patients from hospital settings to less restricting settings in the community, a shift known as deinstitutionalization, because the shift was typically not accompanied by commensurate development of community-based services. Critics say that deinstitutionalization has led to large numbers of people who would once have been inpatients being incarcerated in jails, and prisons are becoming homeless. These scenarios occurred when outpatient services were not available or patients chose not to adhere to treatment outside the hospital. In some jurisdictions, laws authorizing court-ordered outpatient treatment have been passed in an effort to compel individuals with chronic, untreated severe mental illness to accept treatment while living outside the hospital. Since the late 1960s, the Italian physician Giorgio Antonucci questioned the basis themselves of psychiatry through the dismantling of the psychiatric hospitals Osservanza and Luigi Lolli and the liberation and restitution to life of the people there secluded. Before the 1960s deinstitutionalization, there were earlier efforts to free psychiatric patients. Dr. Philippe Pinel ordered the removal of chains from patients. There was a study of 269 patients from Vermont State Hospital done by Courtney M. Harding, Ph.D. and Associates. About two-thirds of the ex-patients did well after deinstitutionalization. Around the world, United Nations General Assembly, Principles for the Protection of Persons with Mental Illness and the Improvement of Mental Health Care is a non-binding resolution advocating certain broadly drawn procedures for the carrying out of involuntary commitment. These principles have been used in many countries where local laws have been revised and new ones implemented. The UN runs programs in some countries to assist in this process. Politically motivated abuses. At certain places and times, the practice of involuntary commitment has been used for the suppression of dissent, or in a punitive way. In the former Soviet Union, psychiatric hospitals were used as prisons to isolate political prisoners from the rest of society. British playwright Tom Stoppard wrote "Every Good Boy Deserves Favor" about the relationship between a patient and his doctor in one of these hospitals. Stoppard was inspired by a meeting with a Russian exile. In 1927, after the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti in the United States, a demonstrator named Aurora D'Angelo was sent to a mental health facility for psychiatric evaluation after she participated in a rally in support of the anarchists.